So in our last section we have seen variables, and today we are going to see about data types. Okay, so data types are two types. One is primitive data types and other one is reference data types. Okay, so I request everyone can be mute. If you have any question, yeah, please let me know. So in the data types we are going to see this primitive and reference data types. Okay, so to define the variable we have to mention data type and variable name equal to some value we have to mention, right? It could be a number or it could be a string or character, whatever it could be. So we have to mention some value. Okay, so let's define. Okay, so the actual way of defining the variable, so it could be int and x and then 10. Okay, here int is a data type and x is the variable name and 10 is the value. Okay, so why do we require this data type first of all? Okay, let's say I have defined a name like this. I have declared a variable like this. Okay, you might be wondering what is going to be stored and how much data it is going to be stored. Let's say if I define simply like this a name. Okay, so it is difficult to understand what this variable can store. Okay, whether it's going to store a number or a string or a character or boolean, what it is going to store. So you'll be having first question that what this name variable is going to store, right? And the second question is that how much data, how much memory it can occupy to store something. Okay, so these are the two questions you'll be getting it. Okay, to answer these two questions data types are came into picture. Let's say if I define a data type like this, for example long is also a data type. If I define a long name like this, it's nothing but, okay, so it's a long is a number data type. Okay, so it's going to take numbers only and it is going to take some 64-bit in the memory. Okay, so it will data type will be answering these two things. And let's see the different types of data types which are available in Java and what each data type can allow you to store in the variable and what each data type can store, I mean how much data it can allow you to store in the memory. Okay, there are two things, right? One is what it allows you to store a particular data and it allows you to store particular amount of data in the memory. Okay, let's say there are different types of data types: byte, short, int, long, float, double, char, boolean. Okay, so this byte, if you specify byte for a variable, it allows 8 bits. Okay, it's 8 bits is nothing but 1 byte, right? And minimum value it can allow is -128 and maximum value is 127 and the default value is 0. So if you remember variables are there are two types of variables, right? For example, instance variables and local variables. Okay, and for the local variables you have to define the default value, whereas for the instance variables the default value is by default. For every variable there will be a default value. If it is a byte, the default value is 0. Let's say if you define byte some b1 like this, if you declared like this, okay, you no need to assign anything to this particular b1. If you define like this, and if it is an instance variable, this b1 will be getting the default value as 0. If you, even if you are not initializing anything, okay, you need to remember these things. And short is 16 bits, and its range is minus 32,768 and plus 32,767 is nothing but if you define a variable with a short, okay, this allow that particular variable will allow in this range, the value in this range. You cannot assign a value that is 32,768, it is out of range, and you cannot assign a value that is 32,769, again that is out of range. Okay, you have to assign a value in between. Okay, now int. Okay, so int is the one we mostly used in our Java code. Okay, integer is 32-bit signed, and its range is, it's a very huge value. Let me read like this: minus 2 power 31 and plus 2 power 31 minus 1, and its default value is again 0. Okay, let's say you want to define a number in the billions. Okay, 10 billions or 20 billions, if you want to define a number like that. Okay, so that is the time integer may not be sufficient. Okay, a integer value cannot hold the billion a billion number, so that is the time it's recommended to use long. Okay, when you want to store huge value you can use long. Okay, so it is to reduce the memory. Let's say you want to create a variable, long l equal to 10. Okay, so 10 is a very small number. Okay, so if you keep 10, if you assign a 10 to a long variable, so what happens in the memory, it's going to allocate 64 bits to you. Okay, 64 bits for your Java code. Okay, which is actually not required. You can simply use byte itself, byte b equal to 10, because byte will allow minus 127 to plus 127, right? So it will allow this much range. Okay, so when you want to use a bigger values, okay, so based on the value you are going to assign, you need to choose the data type wisely. Okay, let's say if you are writing a simple program, that is okay. So assigning small values to long, all those things okay, but if you are writing an application, okay, which will be having thousands of classes. Okay, so and each class is going to create some memory in the object, so that is the time you need to very carefully and very wisely have to use all these data types, otherwise it will create unnecessary memory. Okay, again long will be 64 bit and its range is minus 2 power 63 and 2 power plus 2 power 63 minus 1, and float, yeah, you can call this one like this, it's 32 bit. So again float is used to assign the floating values. Let's say float f equal to, so it's like 10.5. Okay, so if you want to define any floating value, okay, if you want to define anything after the decimal, that is 10, after the decimal, if you want to define anything, so you have to use float. Again this float is 32 bit. So if you want to use a huge value with huge decimal with huge floating point number, so it's recommended to use double. So character, basically it's a 16 bit which is used to store the characters. For example, characters will be like this: char c equal to some it will be like this, a or char c1 equal to, you can also define a number. Okay, everything will be converted to a ASCII value, c2 equal to some, yes, some, even anything, any special characters also you can define that. Okay, like this, but everything has to be in the small quotes, and everything should be a single character. Okay, I have not defined multiple. If you define like this, it's not a character, it's a sequence of characters, right? It's a and 1, it's a sequence of characters, but it's not a single character. Character will only allow a single character, remember that. And boolean is, the bits are not defined, and its minimum value is false and its maximum value is true, and the default value is false. Okay, boolean will store either true or false. Boolean is also a data type which stores either true or false. And by default, if you don't define anything for the instance variables or the class variables also, the default value is false. Okay, so yes, so we have opened the Eclipse and we are going to create another one example on data types. Class data types example. So let me define some of the variables. Byte b equal to 10, short s equal to some 200. Okay. Now you can see the error. The type mismatch cannot convert from int to byte. Okay, so what was the byte range we discussed already? Minus 128 to plus 127, am I right? Now I am trying to define 128, which is not allowing. 127 is allowed, 128 is not allowed, because the reason is that it's out of range for the byte. Okay, so if you are going to write any Java certification, such kind of things, yeah, this kind of tricky questions will be asked, and they will be asking you whether it is whether it can be compiled or not. No, it cannot be compiled, right? It's causing the byte range. Okay, let me define I equal to some 5000, and long equal to long L equal to some 10,000, and float F equal to 20.5. Okay, yeah, so I can double d equal to some 50.5d. Okay, and char c equal to some j. Okay, so as I said, character will take only single character. If you try to give another character, yeah, you can get a message, error message, invalid character constant, something like that. Okay, so and boolean, it only take either true or false, right? So you can give true, sorry. So if you guess the problem, okay, there is a b here and there is a b here. Okay, so that's a problem. You cannot give two variables of same name. Okay, this is a variable and this is also a variable. You cannot give two variables of same name. Okay, but if all these are instance variables. Let's say if you keep this one into a local variable, public void display, this is also one important thing to discuss. Let's say I have defined b, it's not allowing because both are instance variable and both are having the same variable name. Let's say if I define this one, so that's not a problem because the scope of boolean variable, sorry, the scope of variable is limited to in this method itself. It is limited to in this method itself. Okay, the class cannot see, the class cannot compare instance variable with the local variable. Okay, so both scope are limited. Okay, this scope is limited to display only. Let's say if you create byte b equals some 20, now you will get the problem. Okay, now class can, the Java can see you that there are two duplicate local variables. Okay, here itself now you can see duplicate local variable. Okay, so that's how it will be. You need to careful while defining the variables also, otherwise you will get a compilation error. Okay, so that's one thing. Let me print all those things. Sys out b, so we already know that sysout is for printing some data. Okay, so how can I call this display method into my main method? Okay, so we already discussed from the main method, if you want to call a class data, that could be a either variables or the methods. First you need to create an object for that class. How can I create the object for that class? So the syntax is class name, some name, and new. You need to remember this new keyword, class name, like this. Okay, so in the same way, let me define this data type example data types. It's a types example. So let me write some name example equal to new data. So you can write some word, and then if you can do control space, it will give you the complete text to you. Okay, so with the example dot, you can call, sorry, example dot, you can call. Now you can see you can able to call these variables directly, or you can also call display, which is printing all the variables which we are defined. So if you can see all these things. Okay, so we already discussed that all these types are called primitive data types. Okay, there is one more type, that is a reference data type. So the reference data type is like this. Okay, example is a reference data type. Okay, so the one which is pointing to the object is called reference data type. Okay, this anyway it's a reference variable. This is called reference variable, or you can also simply call it as variable. Okay, its variable data type is a reference data type, that is data types example. Okay, so anything which is pointing to the object, okay, that variable is called a reference variable, and whose data type is a reference data type. Okay, now let's elaborate more on this one. So when I say data types example, d example equal to new data type example,
seven five.
So let's say assume this is a memory. Okay, so in this memory there is an object created for data type example. Okay, now this is referenced by a variable, that is the example. Okay, so now this is called reference variable. Okay, now data type example, this is an object. When you say new class name, and an object will be created in the memory like this. Okay, this is an object, and this object is referenced by d example. So this is called a reference variable. D example we will call it as a reference variable. So then what is the data type of a reference variable? So we already discussed, right? To defining the variable, the syntax is value and variable name and the data type. Okay, let's say if it is a variable, that will be definitely having a data type. In the same way, we call it is a variable. Okay, we call one more strange way, that is reference variable. So when we call it as a variable, definitely it will be having the data type. So what is the data type for d example? Okay, it's a the data type of d example is this one. Okay, this one, data type example, and we'll call it as that, we call it as reference data type example. Okay, and this we call it as reference data type. Reference data type. Okay, so you need to understand what is a primitive data type and what is a reference data type. Primitive data types are simply integer, long, float, double, short, byte, boolean character, whereas reference data type, okay, is the one which will be usually an object, which will be usually holding an object, or which will be defining some object. Okay, object data, we can also call it as object data type, but we usually calling a reference data type. Okay, so if you see here, this d example is holding the data type example, and when you say it's a variable, it will be definitely having a data type, and the data type of d example is data type example, and we'll be calling it as reference data type. Okay, let's say for example, what is the data type of c? Okay, so the data type of c is character. Character we call it as primitive data type, right? In the same way, what is the data type of d example? It's a data type example, and we call this one as reference data type. Okay, so you need to understand this thing. and so we are defined it, okay, like this. So fine. So remember one more thing, okay. So without the help of a reference variable, you cannot call this, you know, let's say what is that? Let's say boolean. You cannot access this boolean, okay, with the help of. In fact, you cannot call display also. Display also will not come. There is no display method. It's a display class from somewhere else. It's not display method, right? So only with the help of object, okay. So this is also called as object. This is also called as a reference variable, okay. So do not confuse with that, okay. Let's say a person will be having two names, right? One is nickname and one is normal name. In the same way, this example we can call it as a object, also reference variable, okay. For the reference variable, the type is a reference data type, right? That is how the things will be. So I request you to practice this one, okay, and work on it. Let's say one more thing I want to show you. um, I have modified c equal to b here, okay. This is one important thing. I'm also have another method, let's say print. I have changed it to c equal to d. Let me print here sys out c. Let's keep like this. Let's remove this one. Now tell me, dot print, okay. So with this example we are going to wind up. Now answer me. So what is going to be printed in the display method? From the display method, what is going to be printed in this uh, line, that is which you are printing a character, right? So what is going to be printed here and what is going to be printed here? Yeah, it's out. Yeah, can you unmute and tell me, Rahman or Ramya? So what is the value which we are going to print here and what is the value which you are going to print here? I am calling both the methods, display and print. So it's going to print b and b. The reason is that, okay, we are changing the instance variable, okay. The scope of the instance variable is throughout the class. The scope of the instance variable is throughout the class. Wherever you change, it will be changed, okay, and the latest value will be preserved. So in the display method you are changing c equal to b. Now the instance variable value is b and now you are printing it in the again print method. Now it will be taken as c, okay. Let's do one thing. Let's define a variable here, int z equal to 10, okay. Let's print this one, sys out z, okay. Now let's do the same thing here, okay. Let's define a integer int z equal to 20 here, okay. Now you can tell me what is the value of z when I display here. Okay, so I have defined a instance variable z equal to 20 and I have defined another integer variable z equal to 10. So when I print this z, okay, so which is near to this particular statement. So the local variable z is near, right, and it will be printed as 10, okay. And if you print the z here in this method, in the display method, so it's going to print 20 because there is no local variable defined with the name of z. So it will be taking the instance variable value and that is that is 20. Okay,